Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. DealQuest community, this is a little something different we're going to do here on the DealQuest Podcast. As any of you have been listening for a while, maybe up to the last almost 8 years we've been doing this, you know that we do usually 3 guest interviews in a row and then a solo cast, and we've been rolling through that for years. Well, actually, this was a suggestion from Jennifer on our team who said, hey, Corey, why don't you turn the mic on you? Why don't you have Brian, your partner Brian, right? Brian Meegan. You guys have met Brian. He's been on our prior episodes. Why don't you have him interview you? And I think maybe your audience would be interested in learning more about, like, how'd you start the podcast? Why? Lessons learned from it. Maybe even some behind the scenes on like how it benefits our practice, and maybe how you as a business owner might consider, doing a podcast and the reasons for it. So I am going to turn over the mic, the questioning to my partner, Brian Meegan. And I don't quite know what he's going to ask me, but hopefully I'll have answers.
Well, I want to start with congratulations for 400 episodes. There are a lot of series out there that are in the annals of, in the Hall of Fame for series that don't make it that long. So congrats on that milestone. Thanks for the opportunity to interview the interviewer.
400 episodes. That's crazy. We figured, we'll do something special for the 400th.
Yeah. So what year exactly did you start it?
Yeah. So it was, we're in the 8th year here in 2026. So the math tells me it was 18 when I started. I think that's right. I had published the Authentic Negotiating book the year before, and this was all sort of this concept that I was learning about of authority marketing that had me, trigger doing both those things.
So tell me a little bit about authority marketing. Like, how do we get from being a published author to like why a podcast? Like, don't people usually write a book and then go on a speaking tour? Like, what's the deal?
No, that's great. So the first thing is that, in terms of even the concept of authority marketing, which is very different than like being an Instagram influencer or something like that, which I'm certainly not. It was interesting. Like, we talk about what are the pain points in a business, right? And then what are solutions, for it. There was a time, in my law firm's growth or the early stage when it was smaller, where I felt like I could really stay top of mind and in contact and in relationship with all the clients, right? And then if you're blessed enough and you get to scale some, that becomes more difficult, certainly on a one-to-one basis. In fact, it becomes impossible. So there was a period of time where I was frankly frustrated that, like, how do I stay on top of mind and connected in some way with clients and prospects and, referral sources and industry partners and key players at scale? And, there was not a great way to do that. I mean, lawyers had these snail mail newsletters, which were frankly often horrible. There was the services where you can pop your logo on one of these, and I never thought it was consistent with our quality and brand, so I never did that. And then, I remember I'm sitting there at that time, and I've got a LinkedIn account. I don't know if people may remember back in the day. I have a lot of connections on LinkedIn, but I'm not looking for a job, so I have no idea why I'm on LinkedIn and have all these connections, because back then, that's pretty much what LinkedIn was. I have a personal Facebook page, but I'm just using that, which I'm not even on anymore, but I'm using that back then just, for the personal stuff. And then I started hearing about this concept of authority marketing to say, hey, listen, there's a way you can use the internet, right, to stay top of mind at scale, amongst other things, not only the internet. And, the first thing was, hey, if you write a book, right, it establishes you as an authority in a particular topic. And because I'm a negotiating and deal guy, I wrote the Authentic Negotiating book. And then, yes, did I do speaking around that? But also, one of the biggest ways, because even back then, podcasts, it was funny. When I was learning about this, I was not a podcast listener at all. And,
Are you today?
what's that?
Are you today?
I am today. Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like I listened to 100 of them, right? But it was a combination of starting to hear about this authority marketing concept, and then going to an entrepreneurs organization New York event. Most of the listeners know that Brian and I are both members of EO, and that's how we met. Where they had a speaker who was the founder of what became Gimlet Media. It was Alex Bloomberg, who was a guy who had just come out of being a public radio, an NPR public radio host. He had started this podcast company, and he was talking about this podcast he had called Startup, which was a podcast about him starting the podcast company. And it was very meta. It was the joke. And he literally, had episodes about him picking names for the company and having his wife laugh at some of the choices he made, and how he had to, try to pitch Chris Sacca for the big, VC, investor for money, and how it went horrible and whatever. And I totally got into this thing. And then it was also around the time when I was starting to write the book. And then my team around the book, said, oh, well, podcasts are really the way to get out there around the book. Nobody sits in bookstores anymore and signs books, right? So, you get on podcasts, and that gets you exposure, and that gets you speaking engagements. And that's how I learned podcasting, originally from the guesting side.
And so what was your process in terms of starting up? Like, what was the original vision? What made you different from Alex's podcast or any other ones?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, I really thought about it for a bit, and I'm somebody, I've said this to folks, I'm somebody who studies models, right? So I studied the model around books. I studied the model around podcasts. And the first thing I figured out is that, 85+% of the podcasts don't make 15 episodes. There's a term for it. They call it pod fade. There's actually a name for it. And most people thought they do 4 or 8 or 12 or whatever it is. And then it's either too hard, or they all don't have a lot of people listening, or they get busy and they run out of guests or topics, whatever it is, and they stop, right? And I always say to them, it's just not my personality. I'm going to do 0 episodes, or I'm going to do hundreds. And now, interestingly,
We're at
so that was the first commitment. And then I sat down with a bunch of folks that I knew that had successful podcasts. I asked all kinds of questions to learn about it. And then, one of the things that I had already been thinking about when I did the negotiating book is, we do a lot of different things for clients. We help them start up companies, new contracts, and we have a trademark guy. We can do their office leasing. There's a lot we do. The stuff that I really, really love is deals, right? And we did plenty of those. But I said, if you want to be known for something, what people make the mistake of is if you do authority marketing or any kind of marketing, if you don't get known for something, even though you do other things, it's, like just getting known for being a lawyer who does corporate work, right? There's nothing distinguishing about that, right?
generic. Yeah.
So I said, okay, I love deals, and I love encouraging businesses to grow through deals all time. And it's not just M&A, although that's a huge amount of what we do, but it's all types of deals. And I also felt like there was a blind spot, which still exists, a bit on deal-driven growth. Like, there's a lot of businesses that spend all their time on organic growth. And by the way, you should, unless you are one of the tiny fraction of a percentage of companies that's formed as an acquisition company only. If you're an operating company of any type, you better learn how to get customers and clients and get more of them and keep them happy and do organic marketing. But there's this other way to grow, and it's M&A, it's capital raising, it's joint ventures, strategic alliances, licensing, franchising, real estate investment, online affiliate deals, distribution deals. I mean, you name it, there's so many ways to grow. And I always felt it was underutilized. I always felt that a lot of entrepreneurs didn't, understand that there's this other tool in the toolbox. And in fact, that eventually evolved into a talk that I give pretty regularly called There's a Deal for That, taking off from There's an App for That, right? And the concept is that any business frustration, challenge, or issue or opportunity, there's a deal for that. Doesn't mean you should do it, just means that it should be another tool in the toolbox, another option of what you do. So that concept was floating around in my head. Like, I really thought that was a need that entrepreneurial clients needed, that it would different growth opportunities. It's something I was passionate about and loved doing. And when I examined the podcast landscape out there, one, you mentioned startup, like I said, okay, I don't want this to be a general entrepreneurial podcast, not because there are great ones out there, but maybe because there are great ones out there. And, it's too general. And then I didn't even want it. And then I didn't want it to be like there were M&A podcasts out there, or capital raising podcasts who were really focused on one specific type of deal. And because of that ethos and philosophy, that deal driven growth generally, and all types of deals were the opportunity that was missing, I didn't want it to be specific. So that's how I came up with the thesis for what was originally called Fueling Deals for the first year and a half.
Yep.
And that was rebranded to DealQuest about a year and a quarter in, I think it was.
So, all right. So take me back. How many episodes? I know that I feel like I know you sort of had a few in the box there or something. And then what I want to get to is, as you started, what did you learn? Like,
Yeah.
you have it, it's the Mike Tyson, like you start with a plan, then you get punched in the face, and then you really start to figure out what your strategy is.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of things. Yeah. So a few things that I learned in advance of starting it, right? One of those was this, hey, have at least eight to 10 episodes in the can, right? Because life is going to come up. You're going to have trouble. A guest is going to drop out, whatever it is. And if you don't stay ahead of this thing, it's going to become a burden as opposed to, a great thing that you're doing. So that was one of the first pieces of advice. The other piece of advice I got was just start with audio. And we didn't even do anything video. I mean, that we put out there. Now we put stuff out on YouTube and things like that. We still mainly have the biggest part of the audience is a traditional audio podcast listening. But it's almost like to keep it simple, stupid. Don't worry about video. Get the audio done. And even though we recorded in Zoom and the video was there, we just didn't use the video for anything. I like to be able to see the guests, even though we were using the audio. And then, the other thing that happened was that the company that I launched the podcast with originally, who I will mention, the bottom line is that it took me to the third company to do my podcast production and, show notes and marketing and social posts and promotion to get the right player in place for me, right? So that's also when the rebrand happened, right? A year and a quarter, year and a half in, is, this company that we work with, they did some research around, the branding and things like that. And I kind of like the original branding, but DealQuest, came out as the better one, and we changed the format a little bit. I mean, it's fundamentally been interviewing folks, right? Without pre-prep questions, right? Just the conversation. That energy of it has stayed. But we framed it a little differently, and people who've listened anywhere in the last number of hundreds of episodes know I have a way I open it, a way I close it, but everything in between is open. But, it's like anything else. It takes a while, sometimes to get the right team in place, and you got to be willing to make those decisions to figure out what's working and what's not working. And ever since we've made that change, I mean, I always say to folks, potential guests or other folks, we still had it out. And I was, calling friends and clients and buddies or whatever, say, hey, I need a guest for my podcast. And might have had, I don't know, 60 or 80 people listening to an episode, And now we get almost 30,000 listens a month. And we have a constant stream of requests to be on the podcast, and all the podcast brokers and matching services and, you name it, are sending us suggestions, and we have a vetting process, so things have become, more of a team around it. Even I remember I used to have a checklist because I was afraid I would forget things like even to remember to turn off the HVAC so that you don't hear it in the background. Like that was on my checklist, right? And I had to make sure I had the BioWare. Now, frankly, so I just could flip on the lights in the computer or whatever. And, I know it intuitively 400 episodes in, and for a while. But in the beginning, I was nervous. I was like, okay, I got to remember to do this. And how do I do that? And I also, I think like anything else, my interviewing wasn't as good. The flow wasn't as good. Although I will tell you, I had some phenomenal early guests. Like the founder of Uggs, Brian Smith was in the first, I think, 20 episodes, So, I'd still say go back and listen to episodes, but it's a much more professional operation nowadays than it was in the beginning.
Yeah, I'd say, first of all, I thought it was that you would make your interviewees sweat, not you make yourself sweat by turning off the HVAC. Well, you talked a little bit about how you grew you were at 60 or 80 followers early on, whatever. Was there, as you moved forward, as you got better, what was the feedback like in terms of seeing the growth of your listenership? Was there an inflection point where things started to move up? Did you take something from that and go, hey, this is working? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting because the first thing I would say is this, because it's where I sort of oh, this is working, it's less related to the number in terms of popularity because, and this gets to like underlying, like, what are you really looking to achieve with the podcast? But it was that I started consistently, like, people I was speaking to, whether it was industry partner referral source, it was a client I hadn't talked to for a while, it was even a prospect. More and more, they would mention either the podcast itself or a piece of content, right, on my LinkedIn, right? And a lot of, especially back in those days, a lot of the content I was doing on the LinkedIn was coming out of the book and the podcast, right? Basically, they were repurposing parts of the book and then, promoting the episodes. And what I noticed was people were commenting on it. And when I say commenting on it, and this is like a little lesson for folks as well, what they were not doing for the most part was commenting on the actual LinkedIn post, right? Or even liking it. I mean, you were getting some, but like as a percentage. But then there would be all these times where people who had never made a comment or liked a post, when I spoke to them, they would say, "Oh, I love the content you're putting on LinkedIn," or "I listened to that last episode that you did with so-and-so." And you sort of realize, there's this concept they talk about, lurkers, that most people are lurkers, out there, the marketing people talk about, where they read the stuff, but they don't comment. They don't even click a like, right? So like the people who get discouraged by the fact that they're not getting follower or like counts, depending on what your model is. And again, like I'm not looking to get 1 million people to buy a $39 product online, right? That's not our model. So that the first indication was just, oh, wait a second. This idea of being top of mind, of having people, because if people are commenting on my content, it means that, right, that I'm top of mind. They're thinking that they're seeing. Yeah. So that was the first thing, even before I started even tracking, the numbers going up. And then, I mean, the firm we work with started, showing me numbers and they were going up, and like, I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then I started, and this doesn't, but occasionally I started getting these emails from students or from people from other countries or from, whatever about the podcast. And I was like, wow, okay, getting out there. And then I remember a time, I don't know, it was several years back where, my company said, "Oh, we had a spike in Singapore on that episode." I'm like, "Singapore? What?" Like the guest wasn't from Singapore or anything, wasn't about, but for whatever reason. So these weird things started to happen, but it does go to this fundamental question about like what you're trying to achieve with the podcast. And despite the fact that we've grown it so much, and that's a positive, no question, it is actually not the most important thing or the most reason we get value from the podcast as a business is actually not from the listeners per se. So that's an interesting point we could.
Yeah, you're begging the question. Go ahead. What
Okay.
is that most important thing?
So I would say there's two things. One, I mentioned already, which is the ability to stay top of mind with your existing network, right? Actually, three things. One is that. Number two is when inevitably anybody searches you, right? And I'll divide this into an A and a B. Because in the beginning, it's really people searching, like they are referred to me, to us, right? Almost nobody doesn't do a search, right, on the internet about whoever, even on a referral, right? And the fact that they would see the content there, they would see the frequency, and they would see, right, that created. So this authority marketing is about building credibility, right? It's getting exposure and also being seen as authority and credibility, right? So that would happen, right? So now you're not only staying top of mind with your existing people, but you have more gravitas, more credibility, more searchability when somebody checks you out, even if they've been referred. And then this came a later, but now, I mean, it's still a small percentage because we still get most of our business through referrals. But like we get meaningful clients who, when I say to them, on a prospect call with them, and I say, "When did you find out about?" And they say, "I Googled you and you come up as one of the top investment advisor, RA space attorneys. You come up, I was looking for, a top M&A attorney for mid-market companies. And, we found, and like, they're legitimate, like real companies that you kind of wonder, like, don't they have somebody who could refer them? But, especially if you establish a reputation, and especially in an industry or a niche or a geography or whatever it is, for us, the investment advisor space is the easiest example. We've gotten very legitimate clients. I'm talking about real clients from that as well. So there's that. So that's sort of, the three parts of that: the top of mind with the existing folks, the credibility on the check and the gravitas, and then actually just some, searchability. But then the piece that's most underestimated that people don't realize, or they don't even think about. It's actually the guest strategy, right? It's so 400 episodes, 300 of them are with guests, right? That's 300 people I've connected with. Now, some of those folks I had a relationship already with, but that's great because I'm helping them promote their company, promote their whatever they have going on. So that is a value add that I can give to my existing relationships that only, strengthens, right, that relationship and provides value for them. And then I meet a lot of new folks, right? I just before this, I recorded an episode with somebody who has a CFO service, right? Okay. Well, works with middle market companies like we do, right? And I don't know if that's going to turn into any relationship with business is going to come, but I know that there have been a number of people, guests, like I've gotten more business from the guests on the podcast, and whether that's directly or their referrals, right?
Sure.
And even from the audience, right? Even though the audience is a bigger number, because if you do it, again, this is where business model comes in. If you do it smartly, what you do is you use the podcast opportunity to build new relationships with people you might not have otherwise met. And the great part is, it's become cliche to give first and be of service. Well, I really believe in that, not as a quid pro quo, but just to be of service. Well, what's the first thing that's happening in that relationship? I'm giving them access now to what's a big audience, relatively big audience, especially for a niche podcast for them. And they are getting value from our first interaction because I'm, giving them exposure, right? And making them look at them, they're quality people that we have on. So it doesn't take a lot of those folks, again, because we're not selling $39 widgets, right? Any referral to us could be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in business. So people underestimate a lot the value of the ability, if you do it right, to build a relationship with guests as a benefit from your podcast. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as dealmakers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show.
So as you move past 400, looking back from the beginning to now, what's different now? What do you see, and what are you trying to accomplish now that maybe you weren't trying to initially accomplish, and where are you going?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, obviously the quality and the volume of quality guests, right? We don't have to scrounge anymore, and I'm not saying like there was anybody on the podcast that I thought everybody deserved to be on the podcast, have been on the podcast, say whatever, but it's easier just to find quality. I mean, we're vetting through folks now, right? So there's no, we get to pick and choose who we want on the podcast, and we could also be more thoughtful about, oh, wait a second, we had a bunch of people on M&A, or we had a couple of investment bankers on. This investment banker looks great, but let's, hold them off for a while. We want some more variety. I realized, for example, that I hadn't done anything. I think the Wiser Twin episode will have aired before this one does. I said, oh, we haven't done anything on family business business for a while, right? That's a deal. Business partnerships are a deal. Family business partnerships are a deal. I said, let's find somebody, so even though we have a lot of incoming, we will still go outbound to find some specific things if we feel like we haven't had it on for a while. So I want to really continue to do that because I want to continue to expose folks to different types of deals. I think that's important. I think there's value. And just as, for audience, it's more interesting than talking about M&A every week and having, we're not going to talk about valuation of M&A deals every week, right?
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing is that, what's exciting is the deal market always evolves, right? We could be topical. We've had some folks who talk about some of the aspects of AI, for example, easy on how deal flows. So we want to try to have those folks on. Yeah, and continue to have players that can really, really bring value. So in a way, it's it's working. And not only that, I love it. And, we get great, so, in some ways it's a lot of more of the same, but it's never the same. Right. But I mean, like in terms of just the thesis of providing great guests who talk about all kinds of varieties of deals. And here's the other thing about it. And this we want to make sure we continue to do as well. It's not only different types of deals, but it's also like we talk about people, who do exit planning to help people prepare for an exit. We talk about post-deal integration. So it's also not, it's all around. We talk about, had some people on to talk more about mindset and psychology around deals. So we want to keep that variety going because I think not only does that make it more interesting, but also I think there are all these factors. One of my passions that we've had some guests on talked about, and we actually, as you know, had a speaker at the Deal Exchange Conference Rio, was on this post-founder, post-exit depression. Even you make life-changing, generational changing money. Like, so definitely a desire to look for those topics that are less talked about around deal making, that might be taboo or that just not focused on, and making sure we're bringing a well-rounded, experience and picture to folks who are interested in learning more about deals.
Couple of hot takes. Most surprising moment or maybe most surprising guest, something where it just rocked you?
Well, okay. So, wow, there's so many to choose from. I mean, I will say, I mentioned the Brian Smith UGG episode. I'll definitely put that one in there just because it was so early and like such an iconic company. And he also, I mean, he's a great storyteller.
Yeah.
And, this is a guy who came over. I actually introduced him and he did his first EO talk. He's been around the EO circuit a lot in post years, but I had him first, we did a joint New York City and Brooklyn, EO event. And it's just because I had him on the podcast and, he's this guy who comes over, he was a chartered accountant in Australia and decides to come over to the US and, he's a surfer and they all had sheepskin boots and, in Australia, nobody had sheepskin boots here. And, he went around trying to sell them out of the trunk of his car. And he's got all kinds of drama about, investors, partners that took at one point he didn't own the company anymore, then he got it back, So it was a great entrepreneurial story and also a deal story. And he's a great storyteller. So, I love an episode like that. Then there are like the episodes that are with folks like, for example, also a while back, I had, my friend and client and 8 times New York Times bestselling author David Bach on, who not only do I love David, but he talked about, David is one of the few people who actually makes money selling books, period, which almost nobody does. But what was much more fascinating about that was the brand, the partnerships he would do with companies and the licensing deals and how much money he would leverage the books into real business deals behind the scenes, not just getting a book deal and hooking books. So, these folks, that have these interesting ways to look at it. I had Damon Gershon. Damon's, also a friend and client, EO guy. We talked about, he talked about his great, amazing 9/11 story and choke point and how he hired up all the labor in advance of getting the contracts, which was very unusual. But he also talked about this industry association that we helped him put together of all of these regional companies to be able to compete with the nationwide players. And it wasn't just a referral network. Like we helped them build a company that they co-owned and they had standardized contracts and they had standardized referral splits and all this kind of stuff, and it helped them compete. And that was like, that kind of affiliation deal is not something that most people talk about. And it's the kind of thing that gets people, sort of thinking, right, about what might be possible. So, it's those kind of episodes that I love. It's either the great storytellers or we get this behind the scenes thing that, oh, that's another type of deal you can do. How do I apply that to my business?
Has there been one where you got emotional? I mean, you and I know we're good criers. So was there one that hit you in the middle of the interview?
Yeah, 2 heart-centered guys. There's been a few. I mean, I'm trying to remember specific examples. I know, listeners know, for example, that I always end, at least in the last 300 plus, at least of the 400 episodes, I always end with this question about freedom being my highest ideal in life and how that means for me, everything from freedom around the world for people from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. And, and we get a lot of good answers. And some of them are, the stuff you would think of, the ability to do what I want, when I want, where. But when people have, and I'm not thinking of a specific episode now, but there's been several people who the answer to that question has been so heartfelt and meaningful, and just from all different perspectives. Like sometimes it's related to experience with their family and kids, sometimes it's like truly a patriotic conversation, not like some political flag waving thing, but like they really, really, maybe they were immigrants and they really believe in the freedom that's available in this country. So, and then I guess the other category would be, folks who we've been fortunate, and I think it's just the environment that I'm intending to create, where people are willing to share their ups and downs, right? I mean, so for example, we had on, I could picture him. He was the guy that spoke at the EO Deal Exchange conference. I did the card thing. It talked about
Yeah.
was
I've
God,
got his name back here. So
yeah, it'll Dave Hirsch. So Dave Hirsch, he really shared his journey about what he sold his company about, and about being lost and being depressed and, that post-founder, depression. He just didn't talk about it. He talked like, as a concept, he really, really shared it. And when people are willing to get vulnerable like that, and now, what I particularly love is, and Dave's a good example of this, where they turn that journey into, it leads them to their purpose, right? And one of the things that, for example, that Dave Hirsch does is that he works with entrepreneurs to help them exit, right? In a way, prepare for it in a way that doesn't have them go through that, right? So it's, it's things like that where people share their journey. And it's not just, we had an event in EO many years ago called, I think they call it Night of the Living Dead, where the concept was that, it's not unusual, especially for entrepreneurs, to share their hero's journey where where they have the challenges, whatever, but it's always the setup for the overcoming and the success, right? And they don't dwell too long in so I think those guests who are willing to really dwell there a little bit and get really, really honest before, yes, I want to see how you came out of it, what you learned from it. But, where that part of the journey, the tough part is not just a preview and a setup, but is really, really honest and authentic and real. That's, that always gets me emotional as well.
what about the opposite? The blooper reel, the hilarious something that somebody said, or that something went wrong, but it all worked well.
Yeah. I got to think. See, I told you, audience, I didn't know the questions that come out of my mouth. That's why I do the guests. So,
it's tough being interviewed, isn't it, Corey?
It is. Well, especially, with specifics off the top of my head. I'm such a, I'm that classic big picture guy, right? So, yeah, I got to think. I mean, I've had a couple of times where, people like curse and then they're like, oh, was that okay? Right. And although there's not a lot of profanity on the podcast, most episodes don't have it. We don't like, if that's the way they say it, that's the way they say it. Like we don't bleep them or anything. That's been kind of funny. Yeah, I'll try to think of some other examples, but I've definitely had a lot of fun with a lot of the guests. I'm trying to think if there are any other like particular bloopers, but right now that come to mind.
Let me take it a little different direction. Part of what you talked about earlier is helping the entrepreneur sort of understand and learn how to adopt a deal maker's mindset.
Yeah.
So overall of this, what have you learned about the deal maker's mindset from the perspective, not obviously of being a lawyer guiding people, but from their own told experience? What have you taken away personally from the podcast?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. I mean, one of the things that I hadn't really thought about, I think in the beginning, was that there's a parallel. Like I always say that there's a lot of talk about being an employee versus an entrepreneur. There's a lot less. In fact, this is one of the things I talk about in that talk I give. A lot less talked about an entrepreneur versus a deal maker, because those are two different things as well. But there are some parallels in that, like there are born entrepreneurs, and then there are people who should never be entrepreneurs who are, and that's not it's just, self-awareness, right? Yeah. And then there are what they call situational entrepreneurs, right? People that aren't born entrepreneurs, but whatever, they get laid off and they figure it out, or they have a client who comes to them and says, why don't you just do this on your own, right? Well, I think deal making is the same way, right? There are born deal makers, right? And I tend to gravitate to them, and they're fun, and they're like the ones who have the stories about they were 8 or 15, or it's the reason why I start out the podcast asking about, what they wanted to be and then what their first deal was. For some people, that might be early in their career, but for some people, it's like, oh yeah, I was 12 and I traded baseball cards, for this, and then whatever it was, right? But then there were also, plenty of situational deal makers. And I got clear on that, like, not that I didn't know it, but I got that distinction. And there are so many folks the reason why that's encouraging for me is because when you hold something as a natural ability or a talent, right, for the folks that don't feel they have that, they feel like, okay, I can't do that. But like a situational entrepreneur, people can learn to do deals.
Yeah.
And I think you could even learn, now having that personality where you're maybe a little more creative or more risk taking, whatever, right? That's a different thing. There are deals that you could do where you can, it's easy to mitigate risk, in certain ways. So really understanding that different personalities can do those deals, and there is that distinction, that's one thing. I've certainly learned, I've had people on talking about international deals, and how things work in other countries. I've had people on talking about, just different types of creative deals they did, which, I'm like, I know a lot about deals, but it's cool when somebody's like, oh yeah, you did it. Okay. Wow. That's interesting. And obviously that brings more, one of the things that, I love about what we do is that a lot of what we do is not going to be replaced by a bot or AI tomorrow, because it is strategic, it is creative, it's not just, cookie, one of the things I avoided, thank God, at the big firms is, my friends who at some of the, I had a very good experience at my first big firm for various reasons I won't get into. But like I had friends who were sitting at big firms doing their 27th indenture bond deal, with the same docs over and over again, right? For me, that would be brutal. So, when I hear about these different things, then, I get to bring that into our creativity. That's one of the things I've learned and loved. And then, just learning about, and this is one of the things that just fascinates me about our practice and what I've always loved about doing the corporate and deal work is I love meeting people from different industries that I don't know about. I was learning about their industry and the business and, the specifics about that, about that industry. It's one of the things that fascinates me. That's why I love that startup podcast. It's why somebody introduced me to Acquired, which is I never thought I'd 3 to 4, they only do it monthly, thank God. It's 3 to 4 hours. Like, they did a deep dive on Trader Joe's. They did a deep dive on the NFL. They did one on, I guess, their third in a series on Google. Latest one's like Google as an AI company. So I love that kind of stuff. And when you hear it directly from the entrepreneurs, just the ability to learn about different industries. And then I think, and this is one of the beauties of EO, right? Where a lot of people spend only time within their industry, but when you get to hear what people are doing and their thinking and their approach in different industries, sometimes you could actually disrupt, and innovate in your industry because nobody's doing it in your industry that way. But you see, wait a second, I can take what they're doing there and apply it over here. So for me, that's, that kind of learning about, hey, what are these interesting entrepreneurs doing in all these different industries, and let me get more into the industry and what are the trends there? What is the growth and what are they doing that's different that might be applied across sectors really always been fascinating to me.
Well, I think that's a great setup for the next 400 episodes to be looking for those nuggets. Again, a great milestone. Congratulations. It's certainly been fun to hear a little bit about what the last 8 years has been like being a podcast master.
Well, I'll take the compliment, but listen, it's been one of the things I say to folks is that it's one of my favorite things I do, every week, right? Just recording these episodes, meeting people. And I guess one of the things I'll leave the audience with is, this whole authority marketing concept and any way that you get yourself out there, you're going to hear a million things from a million people on what you have to do, what you should be doing. Like everybody needs a book, a podcast. You got to be posting on every social site, whatever. And, no, right? We mainly focus on LinkedIn. We put some stuff up on YouTube. I actually got off Instagram and Facebook forever ago. Never really did anything like that. And, I've been approached to write weekly columns for places, and I'm a good writer, but it would be brutal for me, honestly, to find the time and to think and right? So the reason why I do the podcast is because it is my medium. I love it, right? I love doing it. I look forward to it, which makes me better at it. I'm excited, right? People comment on the energy and the interest. So, I think the thing I'd leave you with, entrepreneurs and business owners and whatever, is that pick the things, right? It doesn't have to be one, but it certainly doesn't have to be 20 or even 8, right? Pick the one or two things that you are not only good at, but that you love doing, that you're passionate about, and then just, double, triple, quadruple, 10 times in on that, and commit to it for the long term. Because over time, listen, I know people who write, on Substack, right? And they get, a huge following, and that's what they do, and that's how they get known. That's never going to be me, but maybe that, that's you. Maybe it's not a podcast, but, just don't get crazy about all these gurus that are telling you have to be everywhere. Pick where your clients, and your prospects are. Pick something you love and pick something you're great at, and then just go all in on it. So I'll leave you with that.
The zone of genius.
Zone of genius.
Well, thank you. This has been great.
I appreciate it, Brian, turning the tables on me. So listen, DealQuest listeners, I am so appreciative, right? We wouldn't be here for 400 episodes if it wasn't for the amazing audience and guests and people who follow the content. And, always want to hear about your feedback, even though we have a long list and we're vetting. If you have a great guest, send them along and we'll vet that too. And just thank you all. And yes, the road to 800. Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Meegan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to kupferlaw.com. That's kupferlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.